Hey, you! Get your broke-ass, welfare-leeching self away from this door. This entrance is for important people. The words, crude and venomous, ripped through the frigid November air. A blade of pure prejudice aimed directly at a black woman standing with quiet poise outside the Harrison County Justice Center. Before the dawn had even broken, a war had been declared. Before we dive into the raw, unfiltered truth of what happened that morning, a morning that would shatter careers and expose a rot hiding in plain sight, make sure you're subscribed and have that notification bell on. You are not going to want to miss a single gut-wrenching second of this. And let us know in the comments right now. What's the craziest abuse of authority you've ever seen? The woman, Dr. Evelyn Hayes, clad in a bespoke Armani suit that likely cost more than the officer's monthly salary, didn't flinch. Before she could even form a response, he was on her, his hand clamping down on her arm like a vice. "Officer, I assure you, I belong here," Evelyn began, her voice a calm, steady island in his churning sea of hostility. "Like hell you do," Officer Frank Miller sneered, his face a mask of smug certainty. He let out a sharp, piercing whistle, a sound meant to summon a dog, not a colleague. "Ramirez, get over here! Help me take out the trash!" A second officer materialized, and together they seized her arms, their grips bruising, their intent clear. They began to drag her backward, away from the brass-handled doors of the courthouse. The smooth, expensive leather of her briefcase screamed as it scraped against the rough, unforgiving concrete. The heels of her Louboutin shoes, a recent gift to herself for a monumental achievement, fought for purchase, scoring useless lines in the pavement. Across the plaza, the early arriving courthouse employees, clerks, paralegals, janitors, froze in doorways and by their cars. A sea of smartphones silently rose, their lenses becoming unblinking witnesses to the degradation. They watched as a woman, the very picture of professional elegance and success, was hauled away like a common criminal. Evelyn didn't struggle. She didn't scream or curse. That would only feed the beast. Instead, she held her head high, her spine a rod of steel, her dignity a silent, powerful rebellion, as two grown men treated her like garbage in front of the very building that promised justice for all, carved in stone above its entrance. Justice, it seemed, was still sleeping. Inside, hours later, the air in courtroom 4B was thick with a tension you could taste. Officer Frank Miller, his uniform freshly pressed and his posture radiating self-righteousness, settled into the witness stand. His lawyer, a slick, silver-haired man named Peterson, approached him with the easy confidence of a man who had successfully defended dozens of cops from the consequences of their actions. "Officer Miller, could you please tell the court about your professional background?" Peterson began, his voice smooth as silk. Miller puffed out his chest, a proud soldier recounting his service. 12 years with Harrison County Courthouse security, sir. For the last 8 of those years, I've been the anchor of the night shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I know this building better than my own home. Every creak, every shadow, every protocol for securing this facility against any potential threat. And on the morning of November 12th, the morning in question, were you working your regular shift? "No, sir," Miller said, his tone shifting to that of a man burdened by the incompetence of others. Officer Henderson called out. His kid had the flu. They were short-staffed, so I was asked to stay on and cover the morning shift, an emergency replacement. He let that hang in the air. He wasn't just a security guard. He was a hero, holding the line. I've probably worked the morning shift, maybe a half-dozen times in my entire career. Peterson nodded, his expression a perfect pantomime of understanding. So, it's fair to say you weren't intimately familiar with the daytime personnel, the judges, the high-level attorneys who would be arriving at that hour. Exactly, Miller agreed, leaning into the narrative. The night shift is a different world. We're dealing with cleaning crews, late-night maintenance, the occasional emergency repair. It's quiet, controlled. The daytime is chaos. All these suits and robes flying in and out. I don't know their faces because by the time they're clocking in, I'm usually heading home to my wife. He shifted in his seat, getting comfortable, the master of his own story. Now, in my 12 years here, I've seen maybe 3-4 black judges, all of them older men, established figures like Judge Albright and Judge Sanitation. But this woman... He shook his head, a gesture of profound dismissal. She didn't carry herself like any judge I'd ever seen. Describe what you observed that morning, officer. It was around 6:30 a.m., still dark out. I see this woman approaching the restricted judicial entrance. That entrance is for judges only. No exceptions. She was dressed nicely, I'll give her that, he conceded, as if bestowing a great compliment. But something was off. Her whole vibe was wrong. Miller's eyes narrowed, painting a picture for the jury with his supposed expertise. In my experience, people who belong somewhere, they walk with purpose. They don't hesitate. They don't look around like they're casing the joint. They don't act evasive. And this woman was acting evasive, Peterson prompted. Oh, absolutely. Textbook. When I approached her and informed her politely that she couldn't use that entrance, she got an attitude immediately. Started making demands, puffing her chest out, claiming she belonged there. That's a classic tactic. It's exactly what troublemakers do when they're trying to fast-talk their way into a place they have no business being. Peterson paced slowly before the jury box, letting the image sink in. What transpired next? Miller leaned forward, his voice dropping into a more serious, conspiratorial tone. She became increasingly agitated, belligerent even. She kept insisting she had business in the restricted area, but when I asked for proper identification or authorization, she couldn't provide it. In my 12 years of experience, sir, that is a colossal red flag. It screams threat. Did you make any attempt to verify her identity? Of course I did, Miller scoffed, offended by the very question. I'm a professional. I asked for a courthouse ID, judicial credentials, a bar card, anything to prove she was who she claimed to be. She had nothing. Couldn't produce a single document. He spread his hands wide, as if the conclusion were obvious to anyone with a shred of common sense. Look, I don't operate on appearances. I operate on protocol. No ID means no access. It's as simple as that. Period. And the physical removal? The prosecution claims it was excessive. Miller's expression hardened into a mask of stern duty. The woman refused multiple lawful orders to vacate the restricted area. She was becoming disruptive, raising her voice, creating a scene and drawing attention from other early arrivals. The situation was escalating, and I had to de-escalate it. I called for backup. And Officer Ramirez responded? That's right. Ramirez has been my partner on and off for 5 years. He'll tell you the same thing. When an individual refuses lawful orders and becomes non-compliant, we are trained to escort them from the premises. It is standard security protocol for maintaining order and ensuring the safety of this entire facility. Psh, Peterson paused, letting the silence amplify his next question. Officer Miller, in your professional opinion, did you use excessive force? Absolutely not, Miller said, his voice ringing with righteous indignation. We used the minimum force necessary to remove a non-compliant, potentially threatening individual from a high-security area. She was escorted, not assaulted. She was guided to the public area where she belonged. He looked directly at the jury. We followed every single protocol in the book. One final question. Why didn't you simply place a call to the courthouse administration to verify her identity? Miller looked genuinely perplexed by the absurdity of the question. Sir, at 6:30 in the morning, the administrative offices are dark. The building is running on a skeleton crew of security. If every person who showed up without an ID could just demand we stop everything and make phone calls to verify their stories, we'd never be able to maintain proper security. The whole system would collapse. So, in your professional opinion, you handled this situation appropriately? Without a single doubt, Miller said, his confidence surging back, full and undeniable. I protected the security of the Harrison County Justice Center, I followed established protocols to the letter, and I treated the individual with the same professional standards I apply to every single person I encounter. His voice grew stronger, more assured. I've handled hundreds of similar situations over my 12 years. This was textbook, a perfect execution of crowd control and threat neutralization. But then, a woman named Sophia Ramirez, Dr. Hayes' attorney, rose for the cross-examination. Her presence was quiet but commanding, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Officer Miller's face. "Officer Miller," she began, her voice calm but sharp. "You mentioned you've worked the night shift almost exclusively for the past 8 years. When was the last time you were required to review and familiarize yourself with the current roster of daytime judicial personnel?" Miller hesitated, the well-oiled machinery of his testimony grinding to a halt. Well, that's not typically a part of my duties on the night shift. So, you would have no way of knowing if any new judges had been appointed to this courthouse in, say, the last month? The night shift doesn't get those memos unless it directly impacts our specific duties, he said, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. Ramirez picked up a document from her table. "Are you aware that the Honorable Dr. Evelyn Hayes was officially appointed to the bench in this very courthouse 4 weeks ago?" Miller's jaw tightened. A muscle began to twitch in his cheek. "I was not informed of that specific appointment, no." "Wouldn't you consider it a basic security protocol to know the faces of the judges you are tasked to protect?" "We have our assigned posts and responsibilities. I focus on my job." "Your job is to recognize authorized personnel, is it not?" The confidence was visibly draining from Miller's face now, replaced by a sullen stubbornness. "Within my normal scope of duties, yes." "And yet, you made zero effort to verify whether Dr. Hayes might be authorized personnel before you physically assaulted her and dragged her from the premises." "She failed to present proper identification," he snapped, his voice clenching. "Did you ask her what type of identification she was carrying?" A long, uncomfortable silence filled the courtroom. She should have known to present her courthouse credentials." "That's not what I asked, Officer Miller," Ramirez pressed, her voice like ice. "Did you at any point specifically ask what identification she had in her possession?" Another pause, this one even longer and more damning. "I followed standard protocol." Ramirez set down her papers, her gaze unwavering. "Officer Miller, in your 12 years of service, how many times have you found it necessary to physically remove an individual from the courthouse premises?" Miller shifted in his seat, the fabric of his uniform suddenly feeling too tight. "I don't keep an exact tally. Approximately, maybe 20, 25 times." "And how many of those 25 individuals were black women in professional business attire?" Peterson shot to his feet. "Objection. Relevance?" "It is entirely relevant to establishing a pattern of behavior, Your Honor," Ramirez countered. The objection was overruled, but the question hung in the air, the damage already done, its implication blooming like a toxic flower in the minds of the jury. Ramirez continued her relentless advance. "You testified earlier, under oath, that you don't operate on appearances. But isn't it true, Officer Miller, that you immediately assumed Dr. Hayes didn't belong, based solely on the fact that you saw a black woman approaching a restricted entrance?" "I observed suspicious behavior," he insisted, his voice rising in panic. "What behavior, exactly? Walking towards a door while being black?" She looked out of place, he blurted out, the words escaping before he could stop them. Out of place how, officer? The courtroom fell utterly silent. Miller had just walked directly into her trap, his own words contradicting the very foundation of his defense. His face turned a deep, mottled red as he struggled to find an answer. Any answer that didn't sound exactly like what it was. Racial profiling, pure and simple, executed with the authority of a badge. I used my professional judgment, he stammered, based on 12 years of experience. But the damage was irreparable. The confident, by-the-book officer had vanished. In his place sat a man whose story was unraveling thread by thread, a man exposed, and everyone in that courtroom could see it happening in real time. Dr. Evelyn Hayes rose from her seat at the plaintiff's table with a grace and composure that instantly commanded the room's attention. She moved toward the witness stand, not as a victim seeking pity, but with the measured, confident stride of someone who owned the very space she occupied in ways the audience could not yet begin to comprehend. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was not the voice of a woman who had been humiliated on a cold, concrete plaza. It was the voice of a scholar, a leader, a woman intimately familiar with the machinations of legal proceedings. Please state your full name for the record, her attorney, Ms. Ramirez, began. Dr. Evelyn Marie Hayes. Her voice was clear, crisp, and professional, utterly unshaken by the morning's traumatic events. Dr. Hayes, can you please describe your routine on the morning in question? Evelyn adjusted her posture slightly, her hands folded calmly in her lap, a picture of serene control. I arrived at the Justice Center at approximately 6:30 a.m., as is my standard practice. I find it beneficial to arrive early in order to review my morning docket, organize my preparations, and ensure that everything is in perfect order for the day ahead. Your morning docket? Your preparations? Yes, Evelyn affirmed. I follow a very specific set of procedures before commencing my daily responsibilities. It requires a period of quiet contemplation to review case materials, check schedules, and mentally prepare for the complex tasks at hand. The way she spoke, with such precision about procedures and responsibilities, hinted at a level of authority far beyond that of a typical courthouse employee. And why did you choose to use the main judicial entrance that morning instead of other available entrances? A flicker of frustration, quickly mastered, crossed Evelyn's face. The electronic access system for my designated parking garage was malfunctioning. My usual, more direct entry point was non-operational. Therefore, I was forced to use the main entrance. It was an inconvenience, but I assumed it would be a minor one. Your usual entry point? Yes, I typically use a more private access route that allows me to reach my chambers without navigating through the public areas of the building. She paused, letting her next words land with deliberate weight. Privacy and efficiency are paramount when one has significant responsibilities to attend to. Ramirez moved closer to the witness stand. Please describe your interaction with Officer Miller. Evelyn's composure remained flawless, but a subtle, steely edge entered her voice. Officer Miller approached me with an immediate and unprovoked hostility. Before I was given any opportunity to explain my presence, he made a series of degrading and baseless assumptions about why I was there. His language was not merely unprofessional, it was deliberately dehumanizing. Can you be more specific about this language? He referred to me as broke-ass and a welfare leech. He then loudly proclaimed that the entrance was for important people. Evelyn's tone remained controlled, but the memory of the insult was a palpable presence in the courtroom. At no point did Officer Miller ask for my identification. He never once inquired as to my purpose for being at the courthouse. He simply looked at me, a black woman, and decided that I had no legitimate reason to exist in that space. What happened when you attempted to explain the situation? I remained calm and made a conscious effort to de-escalate. I stated clearly that I had business in the building and that I belonged there. His response was to whistle for backup and to begin treating me as a physical threat. Evelyn's eyes flashed with a controlled, righteous anger. I was then dragged by two men across a concrete plaza like a piece of luggage, while my own colleagues watched from the windows and doorways above. The courtroom stirred. The word colleagues hung in the air, its full significance not yet understood by most, but its implication was intriguing. Did you, at any point, resist the officers? Absolutely not, she stated firmly. Despite the profound humiliation and the physical discomfort, I maintained my dignity. I understood that resisting would have only escalated an already grossly inappropriate situation and given them the justification they were clearly seeking. Her voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to making critical decisions under immense pressure. Sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is to remain composed and allow the truth to be its own witness. Ramirez walked towards the jury. Dr. Hayes, you mentioned you had business at the courthouse that morning. Can you please elaborate on the nature of that business? Evelyn paused, choosing her words with a surgeon's precision. I had a series of professional obligations that required my presence to commence at precisely 9 a.m. These obligations involve significant responsibilities that directly affect the lives and liberties of multiple people and require extensive, meticulous preparation. And were these obligations scheduled in advance? Yes, for several weeks. My daily schedule is typically planned far in advance due to the demanding nature of my work. Missing or even being late for these obligations would have had severe consequences for a great number of people. What type of work requires such precise scheduling and carries such significant consequences? Another meaningful, resonant pause. Work that involves making final, binding decisions that alter the course of people's futures. Work that requires absolute punctuality and exhaustive preparation. Work that demands not only a deep and comprehensive legal expertise, but also an unimpeachable moral authority. The way she described her work painted a portrait of immense power, though she was careful not to reveal the specific title that came with it. Dr. Hayes, you seem exceptionally familiar with courthouse procedures and security protocols. Can you explain the reason for this familiarity? I have spent a considerable portion of my career within courtrooms. I understand the intricate ways these institutions function, what is expected of all personnel, and how a security force should properly balance the need for safety with a fundamental respect for individual rights. Her knowledge was clearly deeper than that of a visitor, or even a typical attorney. And in your professional and experienced opinion, was Officer Miller's behavior appropriate that morning? Evelyn's voice became firmer, taking on a tone of final judgment. Officer Miller's behavior was a gross violation of every principle of professional security. He made prejudiced assumptions, he failed to follow the most basic verification procedures, and he aggressively escalated a situation that required only simple, respectful communication. She paused, her legal expertise showing through. More importantly, he failed to recognize that true security is not born from intimidation and suspicion. It is born from treating all people with dignity while properly and impartially verifying their credentials. Bro, did his actions affect your ability to fulfill your professional obligations that day? Significantly, she confirmed, the weight in her voice suggesting consequences far beyond mere inconvenience. The incident delayed my arrival to my work area by nearly an hour, caused unnecessary emotional and physical distress, and disrupted the focus and clear judgment required to perform my duties. Peterson, Miller's attorney, began his cross-examination with a heavy dose of skepticism. Dr. Hayes, isn't it true that you could have avoided this entire, unfortunate situation by simply showing the officer your identification? Evelyn's response was measured, but pointed as a dagger. First, I should not be required to prove my right to exist in a public space that I serve. Second, and more factually, Officer Miller never once asked me for identification. He made his assumptions, and he acted on his prejudice. The opportunity for a simple, professional exchange was never offered. But surely you understand the need for security in a building like this? I understand security intimately, she retorted, her voice carrying the authority of one who has professionally delineated such boundaries. I also understand the fundamental difference between legitimate security measures and discriminatory harassment masquerading as protocol. You claim to have had professional obligations at 9:20 a.m. What is your profession exactly? Evelyn met his gaze, her eyes steady and unblinking. I work within the justice system, Mr. Peterson. My role is to ensure that all legal proceedings are conducted fairly, impartially, and in accordance with the law. That's a rather vague description. Are you an attorney? A slight, enigmatic smile touched Evelyn's lips. My role within the justice system does require extensive legal knowledge, yes. You're not answering the question directly, Dr. Hayes. On the contrary, I am answering with the precise amount of clarity the question allows at this stage. There was something almost regal in her composure, as if she were accustomed to controlling the flow of conversations, not being controlled by them. Peterson, growing frustrated, pressed harder. Why won't you simply state your job title for the court? Evelyn's pause was pregnant with meaning, a silence that filled the entire courtroom with anticipation. Because, she said slowly, her voice dropping slightly, my job title would fundamentally and irrevocably change how this courtroom, this jury, and you yourself view everything that transpired this morning. And I believe with every fiber of my being that Officer Miller's actions should be judged on their own merits, on the ugliness of the act itself, not on the title of the person he happened to brutalize. The courtroom buzzed with 1,000 whispered speculations. Who was this woman? Who was this person whose identity could reframe the entire trial? What position could she possibly hold that would transform the entire narrative from a case of racial profiling into something else entirely? But Dr. Evelyn Hayes wasn't ready to reveal her hand just yet. She sat on the stand with the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone holding the ultimate trump card, waiting for exactly the right moment to play it and end the game. 4 weeks earlier, the main ceremonial hall of the Harrison County Justice Center was filled to capacity. Chief Judge Patricia Williams stood at a podium, her voice echoing with pride. Please rise and welcome our newest judicial appointment to the bench, the Honorable Dr. Evelyn Marie Hayes. Evelyn, draped in the heavy black robes of a judge for the first time, raised her right hand and took the oath that officially transformed her from one of the state's most decorated prosecutors into a judge. The moment was captured by local news, applauded by courthouse staff, and entered into the official records of the institution. But Frank Miller, working his solitary night shift, sorting through lost and found items and monitoring empty hallways, never saw any of it. He remained completely unaware. Now, in her home study, surrounded by accolades from her time at Yale Law and awards for her prosecutorial victories, Evelyn reviewed a file that she knew would change everything. Her phone buzzed, displaying the name of the chief judge. Evelyn, have you made a final decision about pursuing this formally? Judge Williams' voice was heavy with concern. Patricia, this isn't just about me anymore, Evelyn said, her eyes fixed on a series of security footage stills laid out on her desk. This is about a systemic pattern of abuse that has been allowed to fester in the dark for far too long. But filing a federal lawsuit against our own courthouse security while you're the newest judge on the bench, the optics could be challenging. That is precisely why it must be me, Evelyn countered, her voice firm. If I, with the power I now hold, do not challenge this behavior, then I am silently endorsing it. What message does that send to the powerless? To the people who look like me and are abused by this system every day? Evelyn pulled out a thick binder, its pages filled with her own annotations. I helped draft these very courthouse security protocols 6 years ago, in my previous role as a legal advisor to the county. Officer Miller violated 6 different procedures before he even laid a hand on me. Miller's defense is that he didn't know who you were. And that is the entire problem, Patricia. He never bothered to ask. He saw a black woman, and his brain filled in the rest with a narrative of prejudice and suspicion. After the call, Evelyn opened her laptop, diving into the hours of security footage her legal team had obtained through Discovery. The videos revealed a sickeningly consistent pattern, stretching back for months, for years. Timestamp, August 2nd. Dr. Alistair Finch, a renowned black cardiologist and expert witness, is aggressively questioned about his presence in the courthouse. The footage shows Miller demanding to see Dr. Finch's medical license and driver's license, a request never made of his white counterparts. Timestamp, September 18th. Sofia Rodriguez, a Latina court reporter, is stopped and interrogated for using the same staff entrance she has used without incident for 5 years. Timestamp, October 5th. Professor Kenji Tanaka, an Asian American law professor from a prestigious university, is forced to provide 3 separate forms of identification before being permitted to observe a public hearing. Video after video told the same story. Frank Miller treating every person of color as a potential threat while waving white visitors through with a smile and a nod, often without a single question. Evelyn cross-referenced these documented incidents with the courthouse's internal complaint records. What she found was as troubling as it was predictable. 9 informal complaints had been filed against Officer Miller over the past 3 years. All of them had been summarily dismissed without a formal investigation. Every single complainant was a person of color. She dug deeper, pulling up Miller's personnel file. His performance reviews were filled with glowing praise for his vigilance and for maintaining the proper courthouse atmosphere. His supervisor's notes commended his proactive security measures, measures that somehow were only ever aimed at minorities. The language was carefully coded, but the pattern was as clear as day. Her assistant, a sharp young paralegal named David, arrived with a new stack of evidence. Judge Hayes, here are the audio transcripts you requested from the security break room. The transcripts were horrifying. They revealed conversations where Miller joked about keeping certain types in their place and referred to professionally dressed black women as probably here for the child support office. His training records were just as damning. Miller hadn't attended a mandatory diversity, equity, and inclusion training in over 5 years. He had consistently used his night shift schedule as an excuse to skip the required sessions. All security complaints, she discovered, were reviewed and adjudicated by Sergeant Bill Morrison, Miller's direct supervisor, and, according to social media, his personal friend and fishing buddy for over a decade. There was no independent oversight. The fox was guarding the henhouse. Evelyn's team had compiled a mountain of evidence. Audio recordings captured Miller using racial slurs when he thought no one was listening. Sworn witness statements from other courthouse employees described a years-long pattern of discriminatory behavior, and the security footage provided the visual proof, showing Miller's clear double standard in action. Courtesy and a smile for white visitors, suspicion and hostility for everyone else. The most damning evidence, however, came from Miller's own incident reports. His own words revealed his twisted mindset. He consistently described professional black men and women as aggressive, agitated, or non-compliant for simply asking questions or asserting their right to be there, while characterizing the exact same behavior from white individuals as assertive or confident. She found 2 previous excessive force complaints filed against him, both involving the family members of black defendants and both dismissed by Sergeant Morrison with minimal review. As Evelyn meticulously organized the evidence into a timeline, the full scope of the problem became terrifyingly clear. This wasn't about one rogue officer having a bad morning. This was about institutional rot. It was about a deep-seated systemic racism hiding behind the veneer of security protocols, enabled by complicit supervisors who valued a quiet shift over protecting the civil rights of the citizens they were paid to serve. She glanced at the photograph on her desk, the one from her swearing-in ceremony. She remembered the weight of the robes on her shoulders and the solemn promise of her oath to uphold justice impartially. The next day in court would offer her the chance to prove that those weren't just empty words. The irony was not lost on her. Frank Miller's blind prejudice, his assumption that she was powerless, would be the very thing that would expose the corrupt system that had protected him for years. And more importantly, this case would ensure that no one else would have to endure what she had. The humiliation of being dragged away from their own workplace, simply for the crime of existing while black. Justice, Evelyn realized, sometimes arrives through the most unexpected and powerful reversals of fortune. We're about to see the evidence that blows this case wide open. The moment where truth hits the spotlight and lies have nowhere left to hide. And if you're feeling that fire in your gut right now, that righteous anger for what Dr. Hayes endured, smash that like button to show that you stand for justice. This is the point of no return. Attorney Sofia Ramirez approached the evidence table with the quiet confidence of someone who knows they are holding a lit stick of dynamite. She lifted a tablet, its screen glowing, ready to shatter Officer Miller's carefully constructed reality. Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit A, a compilation of courthouse security footage from the past 6 months, showing Officer Miller's interactions with various visitors to this justice center. The courtroom's large monitors flickered to life. The first clip showed a timestamp from 3 months prior. Dr. Alistair Finch, a distinguished black cardiologist in a tailored suit, approached the same entrance, carrying a briefcase nearly identical to Evelyn's. Miller's voice, amplified through the speakers, crackled with aggression. "Hold up there, pal. Where do you think you're going in such a hurry?" Dr. Finch stopped, his demeanor polite. "Good morning, officer. I'm here for the Wallace trial. I'm serving as an expert witness for the prosecution." "I'm going to need to see some identification," Miller demanded. "Can't be too careful these days." The footage showed Miller scrutinizing Dr. Finch's driver's license, his hospital ID, and finally his business card for nearly 4 minutes, while 2 white attorneys strolled past without so much as a glance from Miller. His body language was a perfect echo of his interaction with Evelyn. The aggressive posture, the dismissive gestures, the inherent assumption of wrongdoing. "Can you explain this interaction, Officer Miller?" Ramirez asked from her table. Miller shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "That was standard security protocol. We verify the credentials of everyone entering the building." Ramirez clicked to the next video. The timestamp was from the same day, just 20 minutes later. A young white woman in jeans and a hoodie approached the same entrance, looking lost. "Morning, miss," Miller said, his voice transformed, now cheerful and helpful. He practically stepped aside to let her pass. "Actually, officer, I'm not sure where I'm supposed to be," the woman said. "I got called for jury duty, but it's my first time." "No problem at all, ma'am. Just head right on up to the 3rd floor, room 305. They'll get you all sorted out up there." He gave her a friendly smile. No request for identification, no verification of her jury summons, no aggressive questioning. "Is this also your standard protocol, Officer Miller?" Ramirez's voice was laced with sarcasm. The videos continued, each one another nail in the coffin of Miller's defense. Sofia Rodriguez, the Latina court reporter, being interrogated about using her staff ID at the staff entrance while her white colleague streamed past her. Professor Kenji Tanaka, the Asian American law professor, being forced to empty his briefcase onto the security table to prove he wasn't carrying anything dangerous, while white students entered the same public hearing without issue. Miller's face grew redder and redder with each damning clip. His attorney, Peterson, objected repeatedly, claiming the videos were being taken out of context, but the pattern was brutally, undeniably clear. "These are isolated incidents," Miller stammered. "Isolated?" Ramirez shot back. "We have documented 23 such instances over the last 6 months alone. Shall we sit here and watch all of them, officer?" The real bombshell, however, came when Ramirez introduced the audio recordings from the security office break room. Miller's voice, raw and unfiltered, filled the silent courtroom. "You should have seen this uppity broad today. Some black chick in a fancy suit acting like she owned the damn place. Had to put her in her place real quick." Laughter from another officer could be heard in the background. "These people think they can just waltz in anywhere like they belong. That's what we're here for, boys, to keep the standards up. I don't care how much money they put on their back. I can spot trouble a mile away. It's all about keeping the right kind of people in and the wrong kind out." The courtroom erupted in gasps and furious murmurs. Miller's face went completely pale, a ghostly white, as he was confronted with the sound of his own vile prejudice. Peterson scribbled frantically on his legal pad, knowing his entire defense had just been incinerated in real time. Ramirez then called her first witness, Dr. Alistair Finch himself. "Dr. Finch, you are the chief of cardiology at Sterling City General Hospital, correct?" "I am," Dr. Finch said, his voice carrying a quiet dignity tinged with a deep, lingering frustration. 35 years practicing medicine. Can you describe your interaction with Officer Miller 3 months ago?" "I was treated like a potential criminal for the simple act of entering a courthouse where I have testified as an expert witness more than a dozen times. Officer Miller questioned my credentials, my purpose, my very right to be there, with a tone of suspicion and contempt that I have never before experienced from courthouse security. How did this treatment make you feel?" "Humiliated, angry, but mostly I felt concerned. Concerned that if this is how he treats a known medical professional, a man in a suit coming to testify for the state, then what in God's name does he do to ordinary citizens of color who cannot defend themselves?" Next came Sofia Rodriguez, the court reporter. "Ms. Rodriguez, how long have you been employed by this courthouse?" 11 years, she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I have used that staff entrance every single workday for 11 years. Please describe your interaction with Officer Miller." "He stopped me like I was a trespasser in my own place of work. He demanded to know why I was using a restricted entrance and made me prove I was an employee. At the same time, 3 white clerks, all of them junior to me, walked right past us without him saying a word. The pattern became undeniable as witness after witness testified to the exact same treatment. Each person of color was stopped, questioned, interrogated, and forced to prove their legitimacy, while their white counterparts passed by freely." Ramirez then introduced Miller's training records into evidence. "Officer Miller, when was your last mandatory diversity and inclusion training session?" It's been a while," he mumbled. 5 years, to be exact. According to these records, you have missed 17 mandatory sensitivity training sessions, claiming a schedule conflict each and every time. My night shift makes it difficult to attend daytime trainings." "And yet," Ramirez countered, holding up another document, "you somehow managed to attend every single optional firearms training, every overtime certification course, and 3 professional development seminars on counterterrorism during that same period. It seems the only training you have a conflict with is the kind that teaches you not to be a bigot." The most devastating blow came from Sergeant Bill Morrison, Miller's supervisor, whom Ramirez had called as a hostile witness. "Sergeant Morrison, can you tell the court how many formal complaints have been filed against Officer Miller in the past 2 years?" Morrison squirmed on the stand. "I'd have to check the exact number. Allow me to help you. The number is 9. 9 formal complaints, all from people of color, and all of them were dismissed by you without a formal investigation. Can you explain that pattern?" "Frank Miller is a good officer," Morrison insisted, his loyalty overriding his sense of self-preservation. "Sometimes civilians can misunderstand standard security procedures." "Misunderstand them, Sergeant? Or do you mean they correctly identified discriminatory treatment that you then disguised as procedure to protect your friend?" Ramirez presented Morrison's own signed evaluation of Miller. It read, "Officer Miller shows excellent proactive judgment in identifying potential security risks and maintains high standards for courthouse access." When you wrote identifying potential security risks, what exactly did you mean, Sergeant? Morrison's pause was a confession in itself. "People who seem out of place." "And in your professional opinion, who seems out of place in a public courthouse, Sergeant?" Another telling silence. "It's a judgment call based on experience. Experience that, somehow, only ever seems to flag people of color as suspicious." The institutional nature of the problem was now laid bare for all to see. This wasn't just one rogue cop. This was a system, a culture, that had enabled, protected, and even rewarded discriminatory behavior for years. Ramirez's final piece of evidence was a statistical analysis prepared by a civil rights expert. The numbers were staggering. In his documented interactions, Officer Miller stopped and questioned people of color at a rate 13 times higher than white visitors. He requested additional identification from minorities 89% of the time, versus just 3% for white individuals, and 100% of his physical altercations involved people of color. "These statistics don't lie," Ramirez told the jury, her voice ringing with conviction. "They don't have a hidden agenda. They reveal a clear, undeniable, and disgusting pattern of racial profiling that has been enabled, protected, and rewarded by a broken system." As the evidence presentation concluded, the courtroom understood that they had witnessed something far bigger than one ugly incident on a cold November morning. They had seen, in stark, undeniable detail, how institutional racism operates in plain sight. Miller sat at the defendant's table, no longer the confident protector of justice. He had been exposed as the very embodiment of a system that judges people by the color of their skin while claiming to serve justice for all. But the biggest revelation, the one that would turn the case into a legend, was still to come. Sofia Ramirez approached Dr. Evelyn Hayes for what everyone in the courtroom assumed would be some routine follow-up testimony. The trial had settled into a predictable, if dramatic, rhythm. No one, not even the court stenographer, was prepared for the fact that the next 2 minutes would rewrite everything. "Dr. Hayes," Ramirez began, her voice steady, "you mentioned earlier that you had significant professional obligations scheduled for 9 a.m. that morning. Can you please specify for the court exactly what those obligations were?" Evelyn adjusted her posture in the witness stand, a subtle shift that somehow made her seem to grow in stature. Her voice, when she spoke, carried a new and profound authority. "I was scheduled to preside over the 9 a.m. criminal docket. I needed to arrive early to review the case files, consult with my clerk, and prepare for the morning's proceedings." The word preside hung in the air, electric, like lightning before the thunderclap. Jury members physically leaned forward, their brows furrowed, not quite processing the implication of what they had just heard. Ramirez let the word linger for a moment before continuing. "When you say preside, Dr. Hayes, can you please clarify your specific role for the court?" Evelyn looked directly at the jury. then at the judge. Then finally, her gaze settled on the pale, sweating face of Frank Miller. "I am the Honorable Judge Evelyn Marie Hayes, appointed to the bench of this courthouse 4 weeks ago. I was arriving at the Justice Center to perform my duties as the presiding judge of Criminal Court Division C." The courtroom exploded. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room, followed by a tidal wave of frantic whispers. The jury members' mouths hung open in disbelief. Across the room, Frank Miller's face drained of all color, the blood vanishing as if drawn out by a syringe. The sheer, crushing magnitude of his actions crashed down upon him. His lawyer, Peterson, literally dropped his pen, which clattered loudly on the floor as he stared, utterly stupefied. Judge Martinez, presiding over the trial, banged his gavel repeatedly, the sound barely registering over the din. "Order! Order in this courtroom! Order!" The court clerk, a woman named Janet Morrison, stood up, her hand trembling as she held a document. "Your Honor," she said, her voice shaky, "I can confirm. Judge Hayes was indeed scheduled to preside over the 9 a.m. criminal docket that morning. She was supposed to be in this very courtroom." The irony was so thick it was suffocating. Frank Miller had physically prevented a judge from entering her own courthouse to preside over cases in her own courtroom. The woman he had dragged across the concrete, the woman he had called welfare leech, held a position that outranked every single person in the room, except for the chief judge herself. Miller's world crumbled in a visible, catastrophic implosion. His hands began to shake uncontrollably as he finally understood. He hadn't just assaulted a citizen, he had assaulted a sitting federal judge. His 12 years of experience had failed to recognize the newest member of the judiciary. His finely honed eye for troublemakers had mistaken one of the building's most powerful figures for trash. Judge Hayes wasn't simply visiting the courthouse, Ramirez continued, her voice cutting through the remaining buzz, savoring each word. She was reporting to work, to her job as a judge in the very system Officer Miller claimed to be protecting. The revelation instantly recontextualized every piece of evidence. Those professional obligations were sentencing hearings and criminal trials. Her familiarity with the courthouse came from helping write the very procedures he claimed to follow. Her calm authority was the result of years of training to make life-altering decisions under unimaginable pressure. Peterson was whispering frantically to Miller, but Miller seemed catatonic, his eyes wide and vacant. The confident, swaggering officer had been replaced by a man confronting the career-ending, life-altering reality of his own catastrophic prejudice. "Judge Hayes," Ramirez asked, her voice softening with respect, "how did Officer Miller's actions affect your judicial duties that day?" Evelyn's response carried the full weight of her office. "The entire criminal docket was delayed by 45 minutes, while my clerk informed the court of the situation, and I attempted to recover from the altercation. Defendants who were in custody waited in holding cells. Victims and their families waited in the hallways. Attorneys waited at their tables. The entire judicial process was halted because Officer Miller decided I didn't look like I belonged in my own workplace." The real-world consequences of his bigotry were now laid bare. It wasn't just an insult. It was an obstruction of justice. "Did you consider revealing your identity to him during the incident?" Ramirez asked. "I shouldn't have to," Evelyn stated, her voice a quiet storm of conviction. "I should not have to brandish my title to be treated with basic human dignity. Officer Miller's behavior should be judged on its own merits, not on who I turned out to be." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the courtroom, a judge in every sense of the word. "Every person who enters this building deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their position, their power, or the color of their skin." A stunned, profound silence filled the room as the full scope of Miller's blunder sank in. He hadn't just made a professional error. He had committed a federal crime against a member of the judiciary. He hadn't just embarrassed himself. he had brought shame and disgrace upon the entire courthouse security force in front of its newest and most powerful member. Miller finally spoke, his voice a hoarse, barely audible whisper. I didn't know. No, Judge Hayes responded, her voice quiet but as sharp as steel. You didn't know because you didn't ask. You saw a black woman and you assumed. Your 12 years of experience taught you everything except how to see a human being. The revelation transformed everything. What had begun as a civil rights case had become something unprecedented, something historic. A sitting judge seeking justice for her own assault at the hands of those sworn to protect her. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted. It had been completely and irrevocably inverted. Officer Frank Miller, the man who dragged Judge Evelyn Hayes from her own courthouse, now sat in judgment, seeking mercy from the very system he claimed to protect. The hunter had become the hunted, and justice, in all its potent irony, had finally revealed its hand. The woman he thought was powerless held more power than he could have ever possibly imagined. The revelation that Dr. Evelyn Hayes was, in fact, the Honorable Judge Evelyn Hayes had shattered Frank Miller's defense. But the wheels of justice, once set in motion, had to continue turning. Judge Martinez called for a brief recess, a collective gasp for air after the bombshell. When court reconvened, the atmosphere was fundamentally altered. Everyone in the room, the jury, the press, the public, understood they were no longer just spectators at a trial. They were witnesses to legal history. Sofia Ramirez approached Miller for a final cross-examination. He had begun the trial with a puffed-up chest and a cocky swagger. Now he looked like a condemned man, hollowed out and awaiting the fall of the axe. "Officer Miller," Ramirez began, her voice devoid of triumph, filled only with a cold, clinical purpose. "You have just learned, along with the rest of us, that you physically assaulted a sitting federal judge at her place of work. How does that make you feel?" Miller's voice was a cracked whisper. I'm devastated. I had no idea." "You had no idea," Ramirez repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Because you never asked. You saw a black woman, and you made an immediate assumption that she was a threat. Is that not correct?" "No, that's not. Officer Miller, in your 12 years of service, how many white women have you found it necessary to physically drag from the courthouse premises?" Peterson's objection was weak, almost pathetic. Judge Martinez waved it away. Miller's silence was his answer. "I'll take that as a 0, Ramirez said. "Now, how many black women?" Another crushing, damning silence filled the room. "The record shows 5, Officer Miller, including Judge Hayes. Can you explain that pattern to the jury?" Miller's face was slick with sweat. Each situation was different." "Different how, officer? A different skin color which triggered a different, more violent response from you? You testified under oath that you don't see color. So tell me, Officer Miller, how is it that you managed to assault a federal judge because you don't see color? How did you prevent her from entering her own workplace because you are so commendably colorblind?" The courtroom watched as Miller squirmed, his standard hollow defenses crumbling under the undeniable weight of reality. Ramirez produced his personnel file again. "Your training records show you've missed 17 mandatory diversity and sensitivity sessions. You claimed it was due to schedule conflicts with your night shift." "That's right. Yet you managed to attend every optional firearms training, every overtime certification course, and multiple professional development seminars during that same period. It appears, Officer Miller, that the only schedule conflict you have is with learning about the civil rights of the people you are sworn to protect." Miller had no answer. He just sat there, a man drowning in the consequences of his own prejudice. "Officer Miller, do you believe that Judge Hayes looked like a criminal that morning?" The situation was confusing. Confusing? Ramirez's voice rose with incredulity. A professionally dressed woman in a $1,000 suit carrying an expensive briefcase and walking towards the entrance of the building where she works. That confused you? She didn't have proper identification, he blurted out, clinging to the last piece of his shattered narrative. You never asked for identification, Ramirez thundered. You immediately assumed she didn't have it, that she didn't belong, that she was welfare trash. Isn't that the truth? Miller's voice was barely a register above silence. Yes. The admission, a single, whispered word, hung in the air like a death knell. He had just confessed, in open court, to exactly what everyone knew to be true. He judged her based solely on the color of her skin. Ramirez pressed her final advantage. Officer Miller, what was it specifically about Judge Hayes that morning that made you believe she was a threat? Miller's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Any answer he could possibly give would only further expose the depths of his racial bias. Was it her expensive suit? Ramirez asked, her questions like a surgeon's scalpel. Her professional demeanor? Her calm, articulate voice? What specific detail about Judge Evelyn Hayes screamed welfare case to you? I made an error in judgment, he finally managed to say. An error in judgment, officer? Or a crystal clear revelation of your true, deeply held beliefs about black women in positions of power? Peterson's objection was a desperate, futile gesture. The damage was absolute. Frank Miller stood exposed not just as a racist, but as a man whose racism was so ingrained, so automatic, that he assaulted a federal judge without a moment's hesitation. Ramirez delivered the final devastating blow. Officer Miller, Judge Hayes spent 15 years as a top prosecutor for this state before her judicial appointment. She has put more violent criminals behind bars than you have ever encountered in your entire career. Yet, on that morning, you didn't see a protector of the law. You saw a criminal. Why? Miller broke completely. A dry, ragged sob escaped his lips. I don't know, he whispered, his head in his hands. She didn't look like... Like what, Officer Miller? Ramirez's voice was soft now, but no less deadly. Like a judge? Tell the court, officer. Tell us all. What does a judge look like in your mind? The question echoed through the silent courtroom as Miller finally confronted the ugly truth. His mental image of authority, of power, of belonging, did not and had never included a black woman. Officer Miller, do you believe you are fit to continue serving in courthouse security? I've served honorably for 12 years, he pleaded, his last grasp at a life that was already gone. You just assaulted a federal judge. You have been exposed as a man who systematically targets and harasses people of color. You have admitted, under oath, to making assumptions based on race. Tell me, officer, how is any of that honorable service? Frank Miller's world had collapsed. The man who began this trial, cloaked in the authority of his uniform, was now just a broken man, stripped bare, his career, his reputation, and his future utterly destroyed by his own hateful actions and his own damning admissions. No further questions, Your Honor. As Sofia Ramirez returned to her seat, the courtroom understood they had witnessed the complete and total dismantling of not just one man's pathetic defense, but of an entire culture of institutional racism. Frank Miller, the man who thought he was protecting the courthouse from undesirable elements, had just been revealed as the most undesirable element of all. The courtroom felt electric as the attorneys prepared for their closing arguments. Everyone present knew they were witnessing a landmark case, a moment that would be studied in law schools and police academies for decades to come. A searing example of how institutional racism operates and how, sometimes, justice can prevail against even the most entrenched odds. The prosecutor, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Janet Mills, approached the jury. Her voice carried the weight of civil rights history. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "what you have witnessed in this courtroom is not just about one officer's monumentally bad decision. It is about a system that allowed, encouraged, and protected racial discrimination for years, all while hiding behind the authority of a badge and the excuse of protocol." Mills walked slowly past the jury box, making eye contact with each member. Officer Frank Miller didn't just assault Judge Evelyn Hayes on that cold November morning. He assaulted the very principles this justice system claims to uphold. He assaulted the fundamental idea that all people, regardless of their race or station in life, deserve to be treated with dignity. He assaulted the Constitution that he swore an oath to protect. The prosecutor's voice grew stronger, more resonant. But here is what makes this case so truly, profoundly extraordinary. Officer Miller assaulted a sitting federal judge, the very embodiment of the law he claimed to be serving. The irony is so deep it would be comical if the consequences weren't so tragic. She paused at the evidence table, gesturing toward the mountain of video files, audio transcripts, and statistical reports. The evidence is overwhelming, and it is undeniable. Security footage that reveals Miller's racist double standard. Audio recordings that capture his vile, prejudiced language in his own voice. Statistical analysis that proves, beyond any doubt, his discriminatory pattern of behavior. And the powerful testimony from respected professionals who suffered the exact same humiliation. She turned back to the jury, her gaze unwavering. Frank Miller's defense has crumbled because it was built on a foundation of lies. He claims he doesn't see color, while the evidence shows he systematically targets people of color. He claims to follow protocol, while the evidence shows he violated every professional standard of conduct. He claims Judge Hayes looked suspicious, when the truth is, she was simply existing while black in America. Her voice took on a tone of moral authority. This is not about an honest mistake made in a split second. This is about a deeply ingrained prejudice that led a trained security officer to physically assault a federal judge because she did not match his racist, preconceived notion of what power and authority are supposed to look like. Mills approached Miller's table, speaking not to the jury, but directly to him. "Officer Miller, your 12 years of experience taught you everything except the most basic lesson of all, that human dignity is not, and never will be, determined by the color of one's skin. Your badge gave you power, but you chose to use that power to oppress rather than to protect." She returned to face the jury, her voice building to a powerful crescendo. Judge Hayes could have ended this incident in an instant. She could have flashed her credentials. She could have uttered 3 simple words, "I'm Judge Hayes." But she didn't, because she understood something Frank Miller will never comprehend. That justice demands that everyone deserves dignity, not just those who hold titles and positions of power. Frank Miller violated federal civil rights laws. He committed assault under color of authority. He obstructed justice, but most importantly, he betrayed the sacred oath he took to serve and protect all citizens equally. Find him guilty. Send a message, loud and clear, that a badge is not a license to discriminate. Show this community, show this country, that our justice system protects everyone, especially when everyone includes the judges themselves. Miller's attorney, Peterson, rose for what he knew was an impossible defense. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice lacking any real conviction, "my client made mistakes, horrible, life-altering mistakes. I won't stand here and pretend otherwise. But Officer Frank Miller is not the monster the prosecution has painted him to be. He is a man who served this county faithfully for 12 years and made a terrible, catastrophic error in judgment." The defense felt hollow, a ghost of an argument. "We ask for your mercy, not because what he did was right, but because good people can sometimes make the worst mistakes of their lives. A guilty verdict will destroy not just his career, but his family, his future, everything he has ever known." Peterson sat down, the air of defeat hanging around him like a shroud. Judge Martinez delivered his final instructions. "Members of the jury, you must decide if Officer Miller's actions constitute a federal civil rights violation, assault under color of law, and obstruction of justice. The evidence has been presented. The law is clear." The jury filed out. They deliberated for exactly 47 minutes, barely enough time to elect a foreman and take a single formal vote. When they returned, the foreman's voice was clear and strong, ringing with conviction. "On the charge of civil rights violations under color of law, we the jury find the defendant guilty. On the charge of assault and battery, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, we find the defendant guilty." Frank Miller collapsed in his chair, a broken man. Peterson patted his shoulder helplessly. 12 years of a career, a lifetime of pride, all of it destroyed by a few minutes of unchecked prejudice. Judge Martinez delivered the sentence immediately, his voice a hammer of judicial authority. "Officer Frank Miller, you have been found guilty of federal crimes that strike at the very heart of our justice system. You used your authority to oppress rather than protect. You discriminated based on race while hiding behind your badge. And you assaulted a federal judge because your own bigotry blinded you to her humanity. You are hereby sentenced to 18 months in a federal penitentiary, to be followed by 2 years of supervised probation. You are permanently barred from holding any position in law enforcement for the rest of your life. You are ordered to complete 200 hours of community service with local CIV.